Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And welcome. I hope you're having a good week here in Danville. It is a cold, rainy Thursday, um, about midway through November, um, and we can tell we're in November. Um, and it is today. My subject is going to be infrastructure. And there are so many things I can say about infrastructure. We'll see which ones I actually say. I want to remind you, speaking of infrastructure, that as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and they'll show up here in my chat room, and we can talk directly. And in a manner of speaking, that's an example of infrastructure. It is an infrastructure for communication. Hello to Bimby in the chat room. And Bimby says, and hello to Nikki Dodd in the chat room. And Bimby says that they are having um, a partly sunny Thursday in lovely Portland, Oregon. And that's lovely. Um, and So I'm on my phone again, and I'm still learning how to do all the things on my phone, and um, Restream again seems to be changing a few little things here and there. So continuing to occasionally hit the wrong button. I hope that you will understand that, and that also speaks to infrastructure. Um, Infrastructure. I think the best way that I could define infrastructure is having the tools that you need before you need them. Um, a very relevant case in point is the hurricane relief following Hurricane Helene. As you know, we did a telethon here on our platforms, helping with that, helping through Byron Ballard and the Mother Grove Goddess Temple. But one of the reasons that that community was able to do as much as it has done, and they are still working very hard on hurricane relief, and they still benefit from any support they can get, and I encourage you to continue to support them. But one of the reasons that they were able to react relatively quickly is they had some infrastructure. Of course, the community itself had some infrastructure, but the local pagan community had some infrastructure to organize relief efforts. Had that infrastructure not been there in the form of the Mother Grove Goddess Temple and numerous people who were willing to assist, they would not have been able to do the things that they have been able to do. Similarly, with the fundraising telethon that we did in support of them, had we not had this infrastructure, we could not have done that. We were able to put it together very quickly because we already had the tools and we already had some of the experience from previous situations that allowed us to do this. Infrastructure is very important when issues arise. It's not as important otherwise, although I think it's always helpful, but it can become very important very suddenly when issues arise. And one of the problems I think the pagan community has is that it often resists the very idea of infrastructure. There are many people in the pagan community who don't want organization. They don't want structure. They want everything to be very very loose, very informal, etc. And there is certainly a time for that and certainly a place for that. But one of the problems that leads to is that when you suddenly need organization because of things that have happened, it can't necessarily be put together overnight. Um, it has to be, to some extent, present before the need arises. And I think that this is something that as people we need to be aware of. I am certainly aware there are some people who will always resist any kind of organization. But the truth is, if you think you're going to have needs that can only be met from outside, then you need to be prepared for them before they arise. Whether that's relief from natural disasters, whether it is um, legal work regarding civil rights, whether it is the availability of books and materials, leaving it to chance is not really a good way to deal with it. Instead, working out how you can supply these things and having the means available to do so before you actually are in serious need of them is the practical way to go. Now, of course, I've been talking for some time now about Project 2025. I understand that it's changed its name yet again, but it's still the same thing. I've been talking about the rise of Christian nationalism or Christian dominionism, because they too keep changing their name, for something like 30 years. Um, we are currently at a point where Christian nationalism has put itself in a very powerful position. They've won their fight. They have won most of the tools they need for the infrastructure they desire. So the question is, what do we do? We who really are not a part of their plan for the future. And the answer is we must have our own infrastructure. We must have our own preparation for things like potential legal challenges to our status as organizations, to our freedoms as individuals. We must have um, plans in place for how we could deal with anything that might arise. And if we don't do our planning now and in coming months, there's not time to do it when the need is suddenly there. It has to be worked out ahead of time. It is a little difficult to say at this point what might be needed, but some things are obvious. And one of them is that there are likely to be um, various legal challenges to various pagan organizations. Maybe not, um, but it would seem likely, um, particularly at the local level in certain areas. And we really need to be looking at those organizations in our community that can help with that. Of course, the Lady Liberty League is probably the most prominent of those. And we need to be supporting those organizations now before we come to the point that they are necessary. That it is necessary for them to involve themselves. We need to, as a community, make sure that people know where they can find helpful resources. And in some cases, we're going to have to start them. We also may or may not be needing to look at social resources such as, for example, food banks and the like, because, we never know for sure what will happen with the economy. We don't know for sure what will happen with the social safety net that has been there in the past, but which Christian nationalists have largely stood on the premise of lessening, if not removing. And we need to be mindful of how we can prepare our community to survive whatever challenges it may face. Now, in the past, we've had certain individuals and certain organizations that did this kind of work and still will be doing it. And then a lot of people who paid no attention or even were against it. Again, because they have a fear of organization, a fear of, well, let's just say it's a fear. But as we go into the future, we need to be mindful of making certain that we do have robust resources within our community that we can call upon if we find we need them. One of the ones that I'm obviously involved in is the elder care ministry that I talk about often now. Um, and we are hoping to create resources for elders within our community, starting small, hopefully getting large. This is going to be a thing, and we've seen for decades now that this has been a thing and is going to become larger as we get more and more elder members in our community. Um, and the time to deal with it is not when you're turning 80. The time to deal with it is when you still have greater vitality to deal with it. The time to deal with it as a community is really long before you need it, because if you deal with it before you need it, it will be there. As a community, we've not done well with this kind of thing in the past, although certain organizations have done better than others. But when it comes to elder care, by and large, the the elders of our community, and in this case, I'm talking to the people who are at various leadership levels or who have made this their career, have basically ended up with whatever they built for themselves. And for some, that's worked out better than others. And um, and hello to Ed the Pagan in the chat room who says, yes, we can do better. And the thing is, we must do better if we want to have better. And we kind of need to be working on it now. And that is elder care. It is legal organizations such as Lady Liberty League, who have done such a great job. But the more who are involved in protecting our rights, the more who are able to involve themselves, the more likely we are to be able to do it. The more resources we have, the more we can fall back upon. And I did a reading earlier this week. Oh, and Edward also says, it takes time. Yes, it takes time. That's why we must start, because it can't be done overnight. You cannot, again, comparing this to the situation with Hurricane Helene, Byron Ballard and the Mother Grove Goddess Temple were able, and other people in the area were able to organize relief because they already had built infrastructure. Had that infrastructure not been there, and this level of tragedy struck that community, they would not have been able to put it together overnight. There are many things I'm sure that were done in the moment, but they could be done because there was enough of a structure there to do it. And for a lot of our community, we don't have that level of structure. And I think that as a community, we need to be looking at that. One of the things that we were talking about earlier in the year was the Pagan World Congress. I think this is one of the things that would be an important subject for that event to discuss, to work on. I was going to say that I had done a reading earlier this week for the coming year, And it has had some good parts in it. So, I mean, how much of what we will need, I think, is way too early to say. But, if the people of Asheville had asked themselves, do we need hurricane relief infrastructure a year ago, I believe they would have said no, because they were considered a place that was safe from that kind of climactic event, um, that kind of climatic event. In fact, I believe they advertised their real estate in part, um, using that as an advantage. And then this year it was not an advantage. So I don't want to be, I don't want to be saying, the sky is falling. We don't know the sky is falling. But if we have no plans for what happens if the sky falls, we're not going to be ready. We know we live in a time of increased dramatic weather events, and we certainly are seeing that. So I think that really nationwide as a community, we need to be prepared for these possibilities. We know we live in a time when our civil rights and our civil status may be challenged. We should not wait for it to be challenged before we make plans for how we will answer it. We know we live in a time where our economy is not necessarily the best in our lifetime, and it may get better, it may get worse. But if it gets worse and we have not already prepared for it, it's going to be a lot harder to deal with in the moment. One of the things, um, in when I was in Florida, the local temple had a food bank. It wasn't used very often, but it existed. And what they basically did is they took food donations and they stored them in case people needed them, and occasionally people did. Um, I think this is something that a lot of temples would benefit by doing. It's very simple to do. It's not hugely expensive, but when it's needed, it's very, very helpful. There are so many things that we could do, and we can't, as individuals, do all of them. But if each individual were to do some of them, then we could do all of them. And from Ed the Pagan in the chat room, the festivals are likely to be our direct climate changes getting too hot. Um, I think that what we're saying is that yes, we're likely to see an effect on the festival culture from continuing climate change. I also, with the continuing rise of Christian dominionism, or as it's more fashionably called now, Christian nationalism, I think we need to wonder if there aren't going to be some other problems for our festival culture. And I think we need to be prepared for that. And I think the people who organize the festivals should be thinking in those terms so that they're prepared before it happens. And so I guess really the main thing I'm saying about infrastructure in this program is that it's always wise to be prepared before it happens. Um, Now, you can't prepare for everything, because there are always going to be things that will be surprises. But sometimes if you're prepared for one thing, it will apply to many things. And hello to Lolan in the chat room who says, I agree. It's time to batten down the hatches. A storm is coming. And again, Ed the Pagan and I, separately and together for something like 30 years, have warned about the rise of Christian nationalism. Um, there's no longer a need to warn about it. It is here. Um, they could not have asked for a greater victory. And to think that they're not going to try to put in the policies that they have stood for all this time is simply foolish. Whether they'll get them all in remains to be seen. What may or may not distract them from that agenda remains to be seen. Um, but to just assume that the world will continue as if they had not risen in power is foolish. And the same is true for climate change. We see the predictions coming true, the things that we were told we should expect happening. We therefore, to the extent that we can prepare for it, should do what we can. Now, I always like to talk about the fact that I first heard the concept of climate change within the metaphysical community all the way back in the 1970s. And in fact, it has been talked about in parts of the metaphysical community going back to the 1930s and 40s, usually in different language, but clearly the same thing. Um, for example, the metaphysical community does not usually refer to rising ocean levels, but often use the image of coastal areas falling into the sea. But if you think about it, it's clearly a vision of the same thing. Um, and what do we do with this? Well, I think that we have to look at what we as individuals, as organizations can do to prepare for these changes, and we really need to start doing it. The political ones, the uh, climactic ones, the social ones, because I think we're going to be seeing a lot of upheaval across all of these things. And if you're following the astrology for this year, you know that it's been quite extreme and is not going to be getting less extreme during the remaining part of the year. It has been a time of very challenging astrological aspects, and that is continuing. Now, when we look at the concept of the turning of the age, and if you're Corellian, you will know that by Corellian reckoning, we are at the start of the Aquarian age, but arguably still within the cusp period where we're still clearing out the old. And you would expect some of that to be rather difficult to go through. That there are many changes to be dealt with. And I guess part of what I'm saying is that we must not pretend that that those changes are not upon us. We must step up to that plate and do what is necessary for ourselves and our communities to have the best advantage of what we are given and to make the best that we can make for ourselves and our descendants. I am certainly not of the point of view that either that we are in or that there is a quote end of times. But I do believe we're in a change. And that ties into the whole issue of zodiological ages. It is a change and it could be a wrenching one. And a lot of that depends on how we take advantage of the energies of this time. And we must stand for what we feel is desirable. Because certainly others will do so as well. And what we see if we look at other times when the zodiological age was changing, and certain cultures simply ceased to be through one disaster or another. Significant weather events tend to come with this particular historical curve when the age is changing. At the close of the Roman Empire, which was um, the ending of the Aryan Age and the beginning of the Piscean Age, we saw a lot of natural disasters happening. If we go back to the ending of the Taurian Age and the beginning of the Aryan Age, we see a lot of natural disasters happening. We also, in both cases, see a lot of political change. In some cases, political collapse. In other cases, development of new systems. And, I think it's very important for us to be mindful of this. And I want to say hello to oh yes, and Bimby says we're going to have to deal with all the massive amounts of people who are. I'm having some difficulty reading the screen just a moment, but yes, we're going to have to deal with a lot of things. Now, at this point, I need to take a moment for our sponsors because we love our sponsors. And this is taking a few moments longer than I would have liked, but here we go.
Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours.
And we want to thank our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Reverend Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. Our next auction will be Saturday at 4 p.m. Central. I hope you will join us for that. Now, Bimby was saying in the chat room that we will have to deal with the massive amount of people who are clinging to the old ways. We need to guide them to the more evolved way of thinking. And yes, that is desirable. And when we look at the turning of the age in previous generations, some places move forward, some, if anything, move backward in different ways of working on the lessons that go along with that age. It would be, well, all my life I've heard people talk about the age of Aquarius as if it were paradise on Earth, which is ridiculous, is good for a song, and I'm sure you'll remember the song. But in terms of astrology, yes, it can have very good things, can also have very bad things. Like every other sign, Aquarius has both its positive and its negative sides. And either or both of these can manifest in the age of Aquarius. And if we want to see more of those positive manifestations, we need to make them. We cannot simply assume that's what we're going to get. And I think that we are at a moment when that is particularly important for us to realize. Can we have that very positive future? Absolutely. But we have to make it. We have to work on it. We have to pull it forward. Because there are lots of other people who are clinging to those older ideas. And although those will certainly change with the energy of the age, they aren't necessarily going to move forward if nobody moves them forward. And that is our job as spiritual people. So with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour. I'm going to be back tomorrow with my weekly roundup of stories. And so far, the best story I've seen is that the Onion has purchased the InfoWars Media Group, which is just a delightful story in the making and a sign of certain things moving forward. And we'll talk about that tomorrow and other interesting things in the news. And now let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to make the positive changes that we hope to see. Help us to build the better world we hope to have. Help us to be the change we want to see. And beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love. And knowing you are always with us from respect, we thank you for your presence. And may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always. And I'll see you tomorrow.